Part 14. Treating the concubine, eliminating the wife, reborn. I refuse to marry the scumbag and marry the prince. Author, Gigi. Chapter 143. Chang Liu hesitated for a moment, and then said with a sudden thought, actually, Xiu has been plotting against His Highness for a long time. Lu Yao said that he had been deeply in love since September last year. He was so thoughtful that he poured the medicine on me and ran away tonight. Now, I still don't know it. Chang Liu scratched the back of his head in confusion, walked around Xie Tingzhou, and suddenly said, "It turns out that the person you are holding is Shizhi, Your Highness. Why doesn't he go by himself for such a big man?" Xie Tingzhou's arms around his neck tightened and he said, "No. You all bullied me and came to lie to me." Chang Liu said, "This is clearly Shizhi. I can recognize him even after he drugged me and turned into ashes." After saying that, he stretched out his hand to pull the person. "Come down. How can such a big person be hugged by the prince? Are you ashamed?" Xie Tingzhou hugged the person and said, "What did you say?" That tone was clearly speaking to the person in his arms. "Ah, okay, okay." Shen Yu accepted her fate. Shen Yu opened her hood a little, revealing only one face, then pulled off the veil and said, "It's me. How did you recognize me?" "Your shoes," Chang Liu said with his eyes rolling. "You definitely didn't help me when you poured the medicine on me, so I fell to the ground. In my dream, all I can think about is how your shoes look like." That was the last scene before Chang Liu fainted, and he remembers it very clearly. "I missed a move in chess. I changed my clothes and forgot to change my shoes." Shen Yu laughed dryly and said, "I didn't have time to help you. You fainted too quickly. I thought you would have to eat 3 pieces before you fainted. Who knew you were so ignorant that you could predict wrong things?" Chang Liu snorted, "Then come down. I haven't made it clear to you about tonight." 11 Feng closed his eyes. This child couldn't be taught well. He was running rampant all day long because he was spoiled by others at a young age. When he opened his eyes, he saw Chang Liu reaching out towards Shizhi. "Why are you wrapped up so tightly? Is it possible that you don't have any clothes on?" Before 11 Feng could stop him, Chang Liu pulled Shizhi's cloak. "Ah!" Then he ran towards him screaming and hid behind Zai Feng. Shen Yu sighed. There was nothing she could do if the child saw it. She patted Xie Tingzhou's shoulder and said, "Put me down." Chang Liu seemed to have seen something extraordinary, hiding behind 11 Feng and shivering. Zai Feng asked secretly, "You really have nothing to wear?" Chang Liu shook his head blankly. "Zai Feng, when you shake your head, does it mean you are wearing something or not?" "What are you two muttering about?" Shen Yu walked towards the two of them, untied the tether of the cloak, and threw the cloak to Xie Tingzhou. 11 Feng just happened to move his gaze away from Chang Liu, and when he saw the person in front of him, his shoulder that was leaning on the pillar suddenly slipped. Chang Liu hurriedly supported him from behind. "You know why I reacted like this just now, right? He is a big man wearing women's clothes. I used to hang out with such a pervert. It's so scary." Shen Yu almost lost her balance. I thought Chang Liu was so surprised when he saw her as a daughter, but unexpectedly he thought she had some quirks. After all, 11 Feng is more stable than Chang Liu, and he is not as careless as Chang Liu. He lowered his gaze after just one glance, and then tugged on Chang Liu behind him. Shen Yu turned to Xie Tingzhou for help. "He called me a pervert." He looked at Chang Liu and smiled, and when he turned his eyes to her, his eyes softened a little. "Then you fight back." Shen Yu walked up to Chang Liu and said, "Look carefully, how do I look like a man?" Chang Liu opened his eyes just a slit and glanced up and down. "Eh? Are you really a woman?" Xie Tingzhou stepped into the room and said, "Come in, everyone." The two sat down and stayed at the door for a long time, refusing to come in. Zai Feng took him by the collar and carried him through the door. "Didn't you say you wanted to settle the score with Shizhi? Go." Chang Liu opened the door and said, Yeah, there's nothing to settle. It really doesn't count, Shen Yu teased him. If you want to compensate, you won't be able to find this shop after passing through this village. Chang Lu glanced at Xie Tingzhou, cleared his throat and said to Shen Yu, although you are a woman, you can't erase the fact that you drugged me. The debt still needs to be settled. Xie Tingzhou glanced at him, what if she is the crown princess? Before Shen Yu could refute, Chang Liu burst into tears and said, you are bullying others with power. I will write a letter to the prince to sue you. Stop teasing him, Shen Yu said, don't you want a jar? Go to the warehouse and pick one. Chang Liu's eyes lit up, you are such a good person. I will ask you to medicate me tomorrow, so I will go now. Zifeng shook his head in despair and watched Chang Liu jump out of the door. Just as he was about to speak, he saw Chang Liu running back again. Anything else? Chang Liu said embarrassedly, when you wear women's clothes, can you not speak in a man's voice? This will make 11 Feng afraid of women in the future and he will not be able to get a wife. 11 Feng was forced out by him and said bluntly, I can't. That's what I will do, Chang Lu whispered, this will make me think that women are all as beautiful as you and have a voice as loud as a bell. Shen Yu. Zifeng Xie Tingzhou said at the right time, take him out and stop his mouth. After babbling for a while, the room finally became quiet. The effort of Chang Liu to pester people was obvious to all. Shen Yu could finally take a breath and poured herself a cup of herbal tea. I killed Do Qing, and it's not entirely me. Don't you want to know what's going on? This is what happened. At the same time, the Shuntian government office was interrogating overnight. Wen Leshan held an official position, and if he committed a crime, it was beyond the control of the Shuntian mansion, but it could not completely ignore it. We can only sort out a bunch of confessions and files before transferring the person to Dali Temple and the Ministry of Punishment. Lu Fu wished he could throw away such a hot potato earlier. This was not done carelessly, and Lu Fu deliberately separated several witnesses to record confessions to avoid collusion in the confession. Where were you when Do Qing died? Fu Yao knelt on the ground and cried, Do Qing and I are in the same room. Did you see what happened? Fuao didn't know what she thought of, she shrank, she nodded and said, a young man broke in. He disliked how noisy our place was and cursed when he came in. I was hiding in the corner and saw that man Master Wen stabbed Mr. Do with the knife. Lu Fu frowned and said, you said Wen Leshan thought you guys were noisy, why are you so noisy? Fu Yao bit her lip and said, because Mr. Do had a bad time with Mr. Wen before, so he whipped me to vent his anger. As he spoke, he slowly rolled up his sleeves. His white and tender arms were covered with red marks, and blood was still oozing from some places. The beating was really heavy. Lu Fu, the prosecutor, and the master who recorded the case all looked away, thinking that Do Qing was really nothing and deserved to die. You said they were having trouble, Lu Fu got the point. Fu Yao said, yes, I was serving next door. At that time, Mr. Do and Mr. Wen had a quarrel. They. Why the noise? Because. Fuao hesitated, I dare not say. Treating the concubine, eliminating the wife, reborn, I refuse to marry the scumbag and marry the prince author, Gigi. Chapter 144. Lu Fu snorted coldly, it's a matter of human life. How can I allow you to hesitate? Do you think I have to be punished before you can give an honest explanation? Fuao trembled in fright, recalling in her mind what the person in the room said to her. You can't explain too quickly, and you can't say nothing at all, otherwise it will arouse people's suspicion. It's best if they poke you one step at a time and you take the next step. Once someone threatens you with your life, you should stop hiding it and behave very seriously. 11 Ming is very scared. Fu Yao sobbed, because Mr. Wen said that Mr. Do had no future. Mr. Do said that Mr. Wen had a good background and was chosen to get out of Mrs. Wen's belly. The master shook his pen and spattered a drop of ink on the case. "Sir, do you still remember this?" Lu Fu thought for a moment and said, "Remember. If the evidence is conclusive, this is Wen Lixheng's motive for killing. The lights in the room are as bright as beans." Xieting Zhou frowned slightly. "Aren't you worried that if they use torture to extract a confession, Fueyao will be unable to bear it and confess from you?" "She didn't dare," Shen Yu said firmly. "Don't forget, she was the one who stabbed the hairpin into Doqing's chest with her own hands for the first time. If she has any doubts, it will be her own life." "What if she framed you?" Xieting Zhou asked. "She didn't even see what I looked like, and no one saw me in the room. Others just thought she killed someone and made up someone to blame. Who would believe her? If she dares to do this, she will do it. Be prepared to lose your life." Xieting Zhou wondered, "But I still don't understand." Judging from the situation when Wen Leshan was taken away, he obviously believed that he had killed someone. "How did you make him think that he had killed someone?" "Inside the Shuntian mansion office." "That's wrong," Lu Fuhan said. "You said before that the candlestick was destroyed during the chase between you and Doqing, so the room should be very dark. How can you be sure that Wen Lixheng killed someone?" Fu Yao said, "My lord is upright and upright. I'm afraid I have never been to a place like Jiaofangxi." Lu Fu cleared his throat and stroked his beard with a solemn expression. "What's so different about a place like Jiaofangxi?" The candles in the Jiaofang office were brightly lit at night. Master Wen opened the door and came in. The candle light from outside came through. Naturally, he could see clearly. After Master Wen killed someone, several other young masters also came in. They all saw it. Lu Fu said solemnly, "Have the testimonies of the other people been recorded?" The clerk presented the confession. "It has been recorded and signed and stamped." Lu Fu read it over and found that the confessions of several people were consistent, pointing out that when they entered the door, they happened to see Wen Leshan insert the knife into Doqing's chest, and then Doqing fell on Wen Leshan, and the knife came out of the chest. But one of them had two confessions. Lu Fu couldn't help but ask, "What's going on?" The clerk said, "This man said at first that it was too dark to see clearly, probably because he wanted to protect Wen Li's life, but later we deceived him and he took advantage." Lu Fu looked at the testimony and thought for a moment and said, "In that case, the previous testimony will be invalid. When the Ministry of Punishment comes tomorrow, these testimonies will be presented together. There is also the prostitutes, let her sign and sign it. By the way, what about Wen Leshan? Have you recruited him?" "No," the clerk said, "he probably drank too much, and his preface and subtitles were incorrect. He would say he had killed someone, and then say he had not." "That's it." Xieting Zhou raised his eyebrows. "Yes," Shen Yu said, "it sounds simple, but in fact it is not that easy to operate. If the wound on the hairpin was not treated well, the gangster would be able to see it, so make sure that the position where Wen Lixheng's knife stabbed is the same as the previous one. The wounds on the chest are exactly the same and are larger than the previous wounds in terms of depth and size, so they can be completely covered up." Shen Yu took a breath to call for help to Doqing. Wen Leshan was annoyed by the noise next door and heard Doqing calling her name, but she thought he was still insulting her. But Wen Leshan didn't draw his sword when he was scolding him before. He wouldn't do it easily, it was just to scare Doqing. The reason that allowed him to draw the sword was that he had to judge that he was in danger. How to make him think that he was in danger was Shen Yu's business. Xieting Zhou held his head. "You sneak attack him, and then use Doqing to block the knife." Shen Yu nodded. "Doqing and I are behind the gauze tent, Wen Leshan can't see clearly." "How can you ensure that you hit the original wound exactly?" Shen Yu said, "I can't guarantee it. I just try my luck. Who can let luck be on my side?" Xieting Zhou. "Don't be so quick to get angry," Shen Yu said, "I have a backup plan. If I miss, I'll probably get 2 more stabs." Xieting's whose eyes seemed to have deep meaning, and he stared at her for a moment. You deliberately framed Wenlich's hen because he was about to go to suppress the bandits and you wanted to hold him back. Not entirely, he even called me daddy. She would not frame Wen Leshan because she wanted to prevent Wen Leshan from going to Kicking. She framed Wen Leshan because he deserved it. At that time, Shen Yu was next door, and Wen Leshan and his friends were complimenting each other in the chat. When Shen's Hongan was mentioned, Wen Leshan said that he deserved it. This was the reason why Shen Yu made up his mind to push Wen Leshan into trouble, and suppressing the bandits was just another gain. Xieting Zhou looked away. What are you going to do about Fu Yao? As long as she can come out safely, her trust in me will deepen. But I guess the ledger is probably not in her hands. Judging from tonight, she doesn't look like a smart person. If I were Ji Liangji, I wouldn't choose to entrust the ledger to her. Give her. Xieting Zhou was silent and uttered two words, Fu Ying. Well, Fu Yao is safe and Fu Ying will naturally be grateful to you. Then Fu Ying will be left to you. Shen Yu winked at Xieting Zhou. Xieting Zhou snorted coldly, you pushed me out like this. She won't do anything to you, and she doesn't want you to be the prince. Xieting Zhou glanced at her and said, it's a pity that some people still dislike her even if she promises her with her body. Shen Yu pretended not to hear, stood up, yawned and said, I'm so sleepy, I have to go back to sleep. Xieting Zhou laughed angrily at her poor acting skills. Why are you so anxious? There is still something unfinished to say. Shen Yu turned around and said, is it important? If it's not important, we'll talk about it tomorrow. Very important. The eyes were very clear, but bottomless, so that when Xieting Zhou slowly approached her, Shen Yu couldn't help but step back. I heard that you have been plotting against me for a long time. Xieting Zhou took a step forward. I heard that you have been pleased with me for a long time. Shen Yu's back was pressed against the window by him, her body leaning back slightly. I said that to dispel Zhang Lianzi's thoughts. With a creak, Shen Yu's back pushed open the window. Bai Yu, who was sleeping under the eaves, straightened his head, opened his eyes and looked around. Perhaps he thought the two were noisy, so he jumped a few steps and moved away. Warm reminder, if you find that clicking the next page will force you to jump to other websites, please use the chapter error or contact us at the bottom to inform us. We will handle it as soon as possible. Thank you for your understanding. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Treating the Concubine, Eliminating the Wife, Reborn, I Refuse to Marry the Scumbag and Marry the Prince. Author, Gigi. Chapter 145. Really, Xieting Zhou said, then I will be even happier. Shen Yu didn't know why he insisted on competing with Zhang Lianzi. Just when he was about to speak, Xieting Zhou came closer. The breath fell on the corner of the lips, but the two of them paused at the same time and quickly exchanged looks. Bai Yu suddenly opened his eyes under the eaves, and suddenly fluttered his wings. At the same time, Shen Yu quickly pushed Xieting Zhou away and slid out of the window like a fish, reaching for the person in the dark with her fingers. The man was dressed in night clothes, and the two of them exchanged several moves in an instant. There was already a fight between men in black and 11 Feng on the roof, and a few others restrained the secret guards. Catch it! A flash of silver light flashed, and Shen Yu stretched out her hand to catch it. She didn't have time to admire this good sword, so she bent her arms and stretched out, pointing the sword tip directly at the opponent. The moon is like a white hong, and the sword is like frost and snow. Her sword was very fast, and countless rays of silver light seemed to be intertwined into a net, trapping the man in black tightly. Two more men in black joined the battle and besieged Shen Yu. Kang Xieting Zhou shouted flatly, and then he saw a black shadow leaping down from the big tree in the courtyard quickly, his golden eyes shining in the dark night. "No. Back off," the man in black scolded in a low voice. Xieting Zhou stood under the eaves wearing a large cloak, with a hint of solemnity in his brows. With a boom, the man was kicked in the chest by Shen Yu and fell to the ground. Kang immediately pounced on him, pressing his front paws on the man's shoulders, and let out a warning roar from his throat. "Beware of him committing suicide," Zifeng shouted from the eaves. Shen Yu immediately stepped forward and locked the other person's jaw, but unfortunately it was too late, the man's body had already begun to twitch. Shen Yu pulled off the man in black's face scarf, squatted on the ground and took a look. "It's too late, he has poison in his teeth, he is a dead soldier." 11 Feng and Anwei threw the two corpses on the ground with a bang and said, "Same," the rest ran away. "That man's lightness is very good. If Chang Lu hadn't slept, he could probably catch up." Shen Yu only found out today that Chang Lu was the best in Qinggong in the palace. "These people are very skilled. They are here to take your life." Shen Yu stood up and looked at Xieting Zhou. Xieting's whose eyes were indifferent, "There are many people who want to take my life. But not Emperor Tongxiu. He wants you to live well." Shen Yu casually drew a piece of cloth from the man in black and carefully wiped the sword body. Xieting Zhou smiled, "The dead Xie Yun cannot be used to contain Balin. This is your sword Yi Jingshuang," she praised. There was a hint of white frost when the sword was drawn just now. She finally knew where the name came from. This was the first time she saw Xieting's whose sword. 11 Feng and the secret guards have already checked several dead soldiers. They were all strangers. They didn't have anything on them. Only one of them had burn marks on his face. Xieting Zhou stepped forward, and 11 Feng took the wind lantern and came closer. "This position," Xieting Zhou said, "it's like a tattoo position. Tattooing is the tattooing of words on a prisoner's face, and then applying charcoal to show the mark of the crime. It can never be scrubbed off and can only be covered up with scalds or burns. Go and check," Xieting Zhou tilted his head and ordered, "whether this person has ever been in prison, why he was arrested, and where he went after being released." 11 Feng took the order, and the secret guards quickly cleaned up the courtyard. 11 Feng left the courtyard gate and quickly turned back. "What's the matter?" Xieting Zhou looked up. Zifeng said unnaturally, "It's no big deal. I forgot to tell you at the same time. You don't have to wait in line for the next rotation." After saying this, he cupped his fists towards Xieting Zhou, turned around and walked away in a few steps. Shen Yu turned around. "Look, this is the reason why I don't want to be exposed. Just because she is a girl, even the rotation was spared for her. Wouldn't that be more freeing?" "Are you going to get paid every month?" Shen Yu asked. Xieting Zhou seemed to think he heard wrongly. "You care about those monthly routines?" "Of course," Shen Yu said seriously, "that's the money I earn through my own skills. It's different from other money. It's special and fragrant." Xieting Zhou smiled at Shen Yu. "Fat? Double the amount, okay." There was a clear chirp in the air, and White Feather swooped down, folded its wings and landed on Xieting's whose shoulder. What it held in its paws was not a mouse, but a branch of winter jasmine. Xieting's whose eyes moved, he raised his arms to hold Baiyu, took down the winter jasmine flowers, thought for a moment, and said, "Follow Baiyu and see where it goes." He raised his arms, and white feathers rose into the sky. Immediately, a secret guard followed it and disappeared into the night. After everything was done, Kang jumped back into the tree, coming and going silently. His cold and indifferent temperament was somewhat similar to the normal Xieting Zhou. Shen Yu exclaimed, "How did you tame these two babies?" "Patience," Xieting Zhou joked, "just like I am to you. If you endure it, you can always get through it." Shen Yu listened to his aggrieved words and knew that he was acting out again. She couldn't help but curled her lips and followed him into the house. There was one less secret guard and 11 Feng was not there. Worried that the assassin would come back, Shen Yu rested in Xie Ting's room. It's been an uneventful night, one thing after another. Shen Yu was lying on the bed unable to sleep. There was a lamp lit outside, and Xie Ting's figure at his desk handling official duties was reflected on the screen. An hour later, the secret guard and Bai Yu came back together. Xie Tingzhou opened the door and went out. Shen Yu pricked up her ears and listened for a long time but couldn't hear what the two of them were talking about. After a while, Xie Tingzhou came back and continued to process official documents. Another moment passed, and hearing the sound of tossing and turning in the bedroom, Xie Tingzhou put down his pen and drank half a cup of strong tea. Don't think about it, I'll tell you. Shen Yu quickly got up from the couch, stepped on her shoes and walked out of the screen. Speak quickly. Xie Tingzhou glanced at her and said, go put on the cloak and let me talk. Shen Yu ran back and forth quickly and sat opposite him, listening attentively. There were some questions she couldn't figure out tonight. Since Xie Tingzhou came to Beijing, everything has been fine. To put it in a less modest way, if Xie Tingzhou is fine, then Balin will be fine, which can ensure temporary peace. But why did the other party choose this moment to attack Xie Tingzhou? Xie Tingzhou said, before I speak, you must agree to a condition. What conditions? Chunsu, the day after tomorrow, you're staying at the palace and can't I accompany you? Why? Shen Yu immediately raised her voice to express her dissatisfaction. Xie Tingzhou glanced at her, for whatever reason, do you agree or not? Shen Yu rolled her eyes and nodded slightly. Xie Tingzhou said a name calmly. The secret guard followed to the Xianping mansion. Pei Chunli's father, Shen Yu said in shock, why did Marquis Xianping want to assassinate you? Xie Tingzhou raised his eyes, don't you think this answer is too simple? Shen Yu frowned, as if she could sense something was wrong. The dead man had already taken poison and committed suicide when he was caught, just to avoid being traced back to the person who planned it. But now the clue points directly to Marquis Xianping. What you mean is, Shen Yu said, maybe the assassin has discovered that Bai Yu is following him, so he may have used his trick to blame Marquis Xianping. Xie Tingzhou said, it's just a guess. Let's see when the time comes. After being together for such a long time, Shen Yu also has some understanding of Xie Tingzhou's temperament. He is not a person who talks nonsense, and he usually confirms 8 points when he speaks. The candles burned so loudly that the beeps exploded. Shen Yu thoughtfully reached out to hold the cup of strong tea, but Xie Tingzhou covered her hand. It will be harder to fall asleep after drinking it, so go to sleep. Shen Yu was instigated by him to go to sleep, while Xie Tingzhou stared at the star of the light with a gloomy expression. There must be a reason for someone to assassinate someone at this time. The only thing that can be called a major event in recent days is Chunsu. This year's spring search may not be peaceful. Treating the concubine, eliminating the wife, reborn, I refuse to marry the scumbag and marry the prince. Author, Gigi. Chapter 146. The sky will be dark. Two men in black entered a house before the first ray of morning light. There was a man in brocade robe standing in front of the window, but he didn't look back when he heard the footsteps. Why are you back so late? The man in black knelt down on one knee. His sea blue was too keen, so he followed him all the way. I followed His Highness's instructions and hid in the backyard of Xianping mansion, and came back only after confirming that it was safe. The man in brocade robe said, it was done well, but the important thing is, did you succeed? This subordinate is incompetent, the man in black said nervously. I couldn't hurt him at all. Didn't I say that the 10 of you are considered masters? You couldn't even hurt him at all. There are so many masters inside and outside his courtyard. There are 4 secret guards alone. Besides, there is a woman beside him, and her kung fu is extraordinary. Woman, the man in brocade robe turned around, are you sure? The man in black said, I'm sure, I saw it clearly. Although I didn't fight her directly, Her kung fu was extremely high. No one who fought with her could escape. The man in brocade robe tapped the edge of the window with his fingertips. After a while, he said, "That's a pity. I originally wanted him to stay out of the matter and not get involved in the Chun Tzu incident. It seems he doesn't appreciate it." The man in black said cautiously, "My subordinate is stupid, why should I protect him? Wouldn't it be better to catch them all in one go?" The man in brocade robes chuckled lightly, "Leaving Xieting Zhou behind is indeed a big disaster, but if something happens to him at this moment, and the internal worries have not been resolved, he will have to deal with Balin's foreign troubles. Besides, if he goes to Beishan hunting ground, then my stupid brother has a backer, and that loser Li Jifeng is nothing to be afraid of." Beishan hunting ground is located to the west of Shengjing, only 1 day's journey from Shengjing. Emperor Tongxue was old and felt deeply that his time was short. He also knew that this might be his last spring visit, so he attended the ceremony despite his illness. A group of people set out from Shengjing and mobilized a large number of forbidden troops, plus half of the royal hospital to accompany them. All the young men from the accompanying aristocratic families rode forward on horseback. Only Xieting Zhou took the carriage and fell far behind the group of young men from the aristocratic families. Li Jifeng was also a carefree and happy man, but this time he stopped riding and insisted on following Xieting Zhou in his carriage. The Emperor Luan was driving in front, and Xieting Zhou couldn't use his carriage that was as big as a house, so the carriage was smaller. The car had a short couch and a small table, and it seemed quite crowded after adding 2 grown men. Xieting Zhou leaned on the couch and said lazily, "You would rather squeeze in here with me than go out and have fun with them." Li Jifeng condescended to huddle in a corner. He didn't have any princely bearing and was really humble. "I'm not stupid. The spring search is so boring. I don't fight to the death for a chance to win, like a vicious dog attacking its prey." Xieting Zhou said calmly, "What they are grabbing is not the lottery." A spring search was actually a competition among the princes. Everyone wanted to come out on top in front of Emperor Tongxue and all the civil and military officials. "I know," Li Jifeng said nonchalantly, "they are fighting for fame and wealth. They are fighting for theirs. I don't want to get close to them. What if I am accidentally injured?" Xieting Zhou said, "It's still early, what are you afraid of? No matter how stupid they are, they won't do anything on the road. If something happens in the hunting ground, they can escape safely." Li Jifeng still refused to go out. "If you're not afraid of 10,000, I'm afraid of the worst. I have to follow you. Nowhere is as safe as here." Xieting Zhou looked at Li Jifeng for a long time, and saw that Li Jifeng shrank into the corner again. "Why do you look at me like that?" "How?" "Li Jifeng, it seems like it means something to me." Li Jifeng changed the topic and said, "By the way, I heard that you have a private lifelong contract with a woman. Is that a lie?" "No lie." "What will happen to Shiger then?" Li Jifeng opened the curtain and looked around. "Huh? Where's Shiger? Why didn't you take him with you? He's good at staying with me to protect me." "How do you know she is good at kung fu?" He Li Jifeng said, "What skill are you bad at among your guards?" A large number of people suddenly left the prince's mansion in the north, and the prince's mansion became quite deserted. Shen Yu saw off Xieting Zhou in the morning and returned to Lu Mingxian to change her clothes and pack her luggage. She didn't know why Xieting Zhou deliberately kept her in Shengjing, but her intuition told her that this year's spring search would not be easy. Besides, she had been preparing for this spring search for a long time. Just as he was about to go out, the concierge came to report that the young marquis of the Xianping Marquis mansion was here, saying that it was a very important matter. Because Xieting Zhou had promised not to enter the manor, he was still waiting outside the east gate. Pei Chunli was sitting high on the horse, dressed in riding attire. He was relieved to see Shen Yu coming out and quickly got off the horse. "Luckily you didn't go." "What's the emergency?" Shen Yu approached, Why are you dressed like this? Pei Chunli hesitated. This was the first time Shen Yu saw such a solemn expression on his face. Shen Yu's mind turned and she asked, why didn't you go to Chunsu? After asking this question, the expression on Pei Chunli's face became more solemn. Well, I don't want to go. I stayed here to play with you. You lied, Shen Yu said. You saw my expression just now. You clearly didn't know that I was in the house. Do you think I went to the Beishan hunting ground? Pei Chunli scratched his head anxiously. Shen Yu stared at him for a moment, then pulled him and jumped into the backyard of the palace. Let's talk. Pei Chunli was so frightened that his legs went weak. Before he could stand still, Shen Yu asked, what is going on? Pei Chun was spinning in circles anxiously, as if he didn't know where to start. After wandering for a long time, he stopped and said, I think something is going to happen at Beishan hunting ground. Shen Yu's eyes narrowed. Reason? Pei Chunli said nervously, the young master from the Chunsu family will definitely accompany him every year. I have not been absent since I was 12 years old. But this morning, my father was uncharacteristically letting me study at home and not let me go to the Chunsu. Shen Yu stared at Pei Chunli's eyes, and Pei Chunli's eyes averted slightly. You didn't tell the truth, Shen Yu said. Pei Chunli didn't expect that two lies would be revealed in a row, and he stamped his foot anxiously. I knew I couldn't lie. My father told me that something was going to happen, so he wouldn't let me go. I guess it's okay now. I just thought about what if you went with Xietingzhou. So I came to inform you. Fortunately, you didn't go, Pei Chunli said like a bamboo tube pouring beans. Shen Yu's heart condensed. Marquis Xianping was a prince sealing. He left his only son in Shengjing, which shows that he was sure that this trip was dangerous. You go back first, Shen Yu said. Since your father told you not to go, then don't go. What about you? Pei Chunli asked. Shen Yu smiled and said, of course I will stay in the house. Pei Chunli looked at her quietly. No, are you going to find Xietingzhou? You can't go. Or I will go with you. What are you going to do? I want to save my father. If something happens to him, Pei Chunli was about to cry as he spoke. Shen Yu said, it's best if you don't cause trouble for him. Pei Chunli stopped her. You can go and save Xietingzhou. That's my father. If I am greedy for life and afraid of death, I will be in vain as a son of a man. Shen Yu was silent and stared at Pei Chunli. You can go, but you have to do what I say. Treating the concubine, eliminating the wife, reborn, I refuse to marry the scumbag and marry the prince. Author, Gigi. Chapter 147. It was already evening when the group arrived at Beishan hunting ground. Xietingzhou entered the tent and heard Baiyu falling on the top of the tent and cooing twice. He lifted the curtain and came out and took off a small bamboo tube from Baiyu's leg. After reading it, Xietingzhou crumpled the paper and stuffed it into his sleeve, said no need to follow, and headed in one direction with a livid face. A quarter of an hour later, Zifeng was worried that something would happen, when he saw Xietingzhou returning, followed by a small young master. The young master lowered his head, his neck almost retracted into his body. When he passed by 11 Feng, he winked at him. After entering the tent, Xietingzhou turned around suddenly and said coldly, what did we say? I'm telling you, you won't come to Chunsu. Shen Yu had already been scolded by him once when she was outside, but she didn't expect to come here now. You are cruel enough, don't rush to scold me yet. Shen Yu turned a deaf ear and said bluntly, you will return to Beijing claiming to be sick early tomorrow morning. Something will happen here. Xietingzhou, how do you know? Shen Yu lowered her voice and said, Pei Chunli came to the palace early in the morning to look for me. Marquis Xianping knew that the spring search was dangerous and left him in the capital. He told me not to come. Xietingzhou's eyes deepened. He is very affectionate towards you. Now is not the time to discuss this at all. Shen Yu suddenly stopped speaking and stared at Xie Zhou for a moment. After a moment, she said, "You knew something would happen, so you left me in Shengjing like Marquis Xianping. Do you think I'm stupid?" Xie Zhou knew that she was smart, and as long as he gave her a clue, she would be able to figure it out. "I'll send someone to take you back overnight." Xie Zhou walked out of the tent. Shen Yu grabbed him and said, "I won't leave." Xie Zhou paused, "I won't have any worries if you leave." Shen Yu walked around in front of him, frowned and said, "You know that there are tigers in the mountains, but you are heading to the Tiger Mountains. What are you planning?" Xie Zhou narrowed his eyes and said, "I'll tell you when I get back." "I won't leave." Shen Yu looked at him resolutely. Xie Zhou closed his eyes and still said firmly, "No, this trip is dangerous and you may die." "Then I can't leave, I have to stay and protect you," Shen Yu said anxiously. "You are not afraid?" "Not afraid," Shen Yu said. Xie Zhou's heart softened. He looked deeply into her face. "What if I die? Just thinking about this possibility makes people feel sad." Shen Yu thought for a while and said, "If I die, you are not allowed to marry anyone else. If you die, I will avenge you, and then take you to Hezhu, so that even if you die, you can watch me being popular and drinking spicy food of." Xie Zhou's eyes were moved. "Do you know what this means?" Shen Yu nodded. Xie Zhou's determination finally failed and he laughed. "Remember what you said tonight." Shen Yu, "Yeah." Xie Zhou picked off the leaves hanging on her head and said warmly, "Follow me these days, never leaving. I am here and you are here, I am dead." His eyes suddenly turned cold. "None of us will die." It was late at night, and Xie Zhou didn't sleep. He sat on the edge of the couch and looked at Shen Yu's face under the solitary lamp. His girl is firm and warm, and can always bring inspiring strength to people. She never retreats from desperate situations and never gives up until the last moment. Ever since he sent troops to Yanliang Pass, Xie Zhou had anticipated the outcome. Su would be imprisoned for the rest of his life and would never be able to return to his homeland. He had nothing to do, so he kept accompanying her to investigate the case, and also asked himself what would happen in the future. He was ready to accept his fate. He had thought about wearing a mask all his life and being a drunken prince or prince. But Hikaru said something to him that day. He said that I missed home, and that Shiger must have never seen the grassy fields of spring in the north. At that moment, Xie Zhou was like an enlightenment. He instantly realized that it was his fate to be a prisoner all his life, but it should not be hers. She should be a girl who is as frivolous as a man. How could she be trapped in a world for him? But if he was asked to let go, he could never do it. The only thing is to find a new way out for myself and her. Because he couldn't wait to marry her. Early the next morning, the spring search officially began. Emperor Tongxue was old, so it was impossible for him to play, and most civil servants were not good at riding and shooting, so he accompanied Emperor Tongxue to the home court. Emperor Tongxue's sons were accompanied by 12 personal guards each, and they checked the horses and equipment before setting off. There was a white feather on Xie Zhou's shoulder. There were too many strangers, and it looked like it was ready to go, as if it was going to fly and peck out the prying eyes at the next moment. Shen Yu wore a heroic riding outfit today and stood beside Xie Zhou on horseback. "After we set off, we will go south," Xie Zhou said. The sun was just right today. Shen Yu squinted her eyes and saw that the Baishan hunting ground occupies a large area, and the dense forest stretches endlessly as far as the eye can see. The woods are denser in the south, so I'm afraid you won't be able to warn. Xie Zhou's indifferent eyes glanced across everyone's faces. "It has a way." But Shen Yu's eyes moved slightly, and the knife at her waist came out, cutting off an arrow that was aimed at Xie Zhou. Shen Yu frowned and looked. Prince Li Jinqing put away his bow and said with a smile, "I said there are many masters around Tingzhou, and it is true. Xie Zhou half squinted his eyes against the sunlight. I heard that His Highness the Crown Prince is very skilled in archery. It's true. Emperor Tongxue had been disturbed by the episode here and said in a deep voice, how can a sword without eyes be a piece of cake? Li Jinqing hurriedly said, Father, don't worry, just make a fuss. The arrow has no tip and can't hurt anyone. Shen Yu lowered her head and saw that the arrow really had no tip. He is testing you, Shen Yu said calmly. I still don't believe that your martial arts skills are useless. Xie Zhou glanced at her, then silently looked away. Li Jinqing was the prince and took the lead in leading men and horses into the forest. Xie Zhou tapped his fingers on the reins and suddenly caught the horse's belly and chased after him. Prince! Li Jinqing turned around in response, but his pupils shrank suddenly. Hearing the sound of zheng, a sharp sword was shot straight towards him. Li Jinqing forgot to hide in shock. He wants me dead. Li Jinqing thought so. The arrow was unexpected. When it was still 2 or 3 meters away from Li Jinqing, it hit the ground weakly. Xie Zhou put down his bow and sighed, what a coincidence, the prince's arrow has no tip, and my arrow is weak, so it can't hurt anyone. Li Jinqing was in shock. The moment just now seemed to be the closest to death in his life. He suddenly came up with the idea that even if Xie Zhou was crippled, he was still a wolf that he couldn't afford to offend. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Treating the Concubine, Eliminating the Wife, Reborn, I Refuse to Marry the Scumbag and Marry the Prince. Author, Gigi. Chapter 148. Li Jinqing stared at the direction Xie Zhou was riding away from, the reins in his hands sweating. He was the future emperor, how could he be frightened by Xie Zhou's weak arrow? Brother, don't be angry. There was another clatter of horse hooves, and Li Yanchang rode out slowly from behind the forest. There is no royal land in the world. When my eldest brother succeeds to the throne, it will be necessary to reduce the vassal state. By then, the entire Balan will be your meal. His mere Xie Zhou will mean nothing. Li Jinqing's anger subsided slightly, and he did not answer the question. Instead, he asked in a deep voice, Old Qi, you said that he has not lost his martial arts skills. You are just pretending. What about now? Brother has tried it, Li Yanchang said calmly, but since he is just pretending, how could he reveal his secret in public? Li Jinqing said, if you weren't so sure that he was faking, why would I deliberately want to expose him in front of others? It was the guard next to him who was in trouble. Without that knife, he might have had to take action himself, Li Yanchang said. Li Jinqing rode away, and his guards followed him immediately. Li Yanchang asked, have you confirmed it? Confirmation. A guard stepped forward and said, the guard next to Xie Zhou is indeed the woman I saw that night. Although she disguised herself and looked different, I recognized her sword move. The combination of hardness and softness is a mixture of hundreds of schools of thought, and ordinary people cannot be so integrated. Li Yanchang squinted his eyes, a hint of evil flashed in his eyes, he's hiding a master. Another group of people prepared to enter the forest from the other side of the hunting ground. Li Jifeng and Xie Zhou were riding horses side by side. When they turned around and saw Li Yanchang at the other end, their faces immediately burst into smiles. Brother 7. Li Jifeng ran over with his whip raised. Li Yanchang lowered his expression and said warmly, you and Xie Zhou went into the forest together. Yes, Li Jifeng asked, Brother Qi, where are you going? Li Yanchang didn't answer. Li Jifeng said with a smile, what are you afraid of? It's just me and Tingzhou. We don't compete for the top spot and won't compete with you for prey. We'll just go south and kill a few hares. If we're lucky, we'll hunt another one Luzi, it's not that ugly. After saying that, he shook his riding whip and said, let's go, 7th brother. The group of people was waiting outside the forest. When Li Jifeng caught up with them, they disappeared into the dense forest. Li Yanchang chuckled, "Call him useless, he really knows how to find a backer. Call him not useless, he doesn't know anything." Baishan hunting ground has been a royal hunting ground for nearly 100 years. A large open space has been cut out on the periphery of the forest farm for pasture, which has always been a camping ground. On the first day, the ministers could not hunt with the prince, but the prince and grandson could. When the princes and the children of the aristocratic families entered the forest one after another, the riding and archery competitions began again on the grassland. Emperor Tongxue looked at it for a while and said, "Who do you think among them can come out on top?" Li Zhaonian did not enter the forest. He sprained his foot when mounting his horse this morning, so he accompanied Emperor Tongxue. "Of course it's the eldest brother." "Why?" Emperor Tongxue asked. Li Zhaonian said warmly, "Because the eldest brother is the prince, he must be the one who comes out on top." Emperor Tongxue looked at Li Zhaonian. He was one of his favorite children. He was a gentleman and as gentle as jade. It's a pity that he was born at the wrong time, in such a troubled time. In troubled times, we need heroes and courage, but the only thing we don't need is such a dignified gentleman. "Do you have a favorite word?" Emperor Tongxue suddenly asked. Li Zhaonian was stunned for a moment, not understanding the meaning. After thinking for a moment, he said, "If I had to pick a word I like, let it be the word meow." "Why?" Li Zhaonian said with a smile, "Zhuang once said by the autumn water, planting China in the sea is not like planting rice in Taikang. I think I am so insignificant that I can't shake the universe." Emperor Tongxue nodded in agreement. He also felt tired now. Yes, the corruption of Dazu has been rotten to the roots. With his 95 supreme body, he has not been able to repair this dilapidated country. The energy he invested is like a grain of corn that fell into Dazu's granary. No interest. It took him more than 10 years to figure out the truth, but his son already understood it. Alas! Emperor Tongxue let out a long sigh, "The word meow is not suitable. Among Qin, Jin, Qi, and Chu, are there any words you like?" Li Zhaonian suddenly raised his head and looked at Emperor Tongxue, "Father." Emperor Tongxue waved his hand, "You can go back and pick one." Li Zhaonian lowered his head again, he knew what this meant. Princes in previous dynasties could be crowned kings when they reached adulthood, but in Emperor Tongxue's generation, it has been delayed until now. Now that he is preparing to be crowned king, he is probably lamenting that his time is running out. Emperor Tongxue raised his eyes and looked up, "Is that Anan?" Li Zhaonian followed and looked. In the distance, Marquis Xianping was scolding Pei Chunli. He was kicking the grass with the toe of his shoe with his head hanging down. He had a rebellious look on his face and an angry look on his face, as if he was about to explode in the next moment. Emperor Tongxue laughed, "It seems that Anan has made his father very angry again. Let's call him over." The chamberlain hurriedly went to invite someone, and soon Pei Chunli came running up, followed by the ashen-faced Marquis Xianping. "Pei Chunli, uncle." Marquis Xianping scolded, "No one is big or small in front of the Holy Lord. Why don't you kneel down?" Pei Chunli's real name was Pei Nan. Before he was named, his family members called him Anan. At that time, the sister of Marquis Xianping married the Prince Tongxue Emperor as his concubine and gave birth to the Prince Li Jinqing. Therefore, Pei Chunli called Emperor Tongxue his uncle, and Li Jinqing was Pei Chunli's cousin. "It's okay." Emperor Tongxue waved his hand, "Yesterday, my chariot asked me about you without seeing you. Marquis Xianping said you were not feeling well and stopped coming. Why are you here again today?" Marquis Xianping looked nervous, as if he was afraid that Pei Chunli would say the wrong thing. Pei Chunli glanced at his father and said, "He lied to you. My father detained me at home to endorse the book. The book is so thick." Pei Chunli stretched out his arms to show his exaggerated thickness. I came here secretly on my own. He was just lecturing me. Your Majesty, please beg me for mercy. Pei Chunli has been a happy nut since he was a child, and Emperor Tongxue left. Now that you're here, why don't you go hunting? Pei Chunli remembered Shen Yu's warning that it was okay to go to the Beishan hunting ground, but he had to stay away from the forest farm. My cousin has already gone in. There's no point in me going alone. I'll go tomorrow. There was a burst of cheers on the grass field. Perhaps some military general or the son of a minister had won the prize in the competition. Many ministers went to watch, and Pei Chunli also joined in the fun. Emperor Tongxue rolled up his sleeves and said, Ai Qing seems to have something to say. Wen Hongyuan, Minister of the Ministry of War, had been waiting for a long time and never had a chance to intervene. Seeing that Emperor Tongxue was in a good mood at this moment, he wanted to ask for a favor for his nephew Wen Leshan. Before he could speak, Emperor Tongxue asked, Is it about Wen Leshan's murder? Wen Hongyuan, the old minister, is happy to see that the future generations are formidable. I believe that within 5 years, we will be able to train a group of good generals for the court. However, the suppression of bandits is imminent now, but there is no one to lead the troops. The old minister thinks about Wen Leshan. If he is in custody, it is better to let him go to suppress the bandits and make meritorious service. It's the father's fault if he doesn't teach him. Emperor Tongxue said, I naturally won't dislike you as my uncle because of this matter. Wen Hongyuan quickly picked up his robe and knelt down, with tears of gratitude on his face but a tight feeling in his heart. Your Majesty, Your Grace. Emperor Tongxue was hinting to him that this uncle should protect himself and not get involved in this case. Treating the concubine, eliminating the wife, reborn, I refuse to marry the scumbag and marry the prince author, Gigi. Chapter 149. The heavy snowfall last winter fertilized the land, and the Beishan hunting ground was lush with vegetation and filled with birds and animals. The periphery is usually filled with small prey. The vegetation is thicker on the south side of the hunting ground, and the larger prey is deep in the dense forest. The other princes have already gone to the south where wild beasts are more frequent. Li Jifeng rode aside and followed, just hunt a few hares for show. I've already had people prepare the prey. Then we'll say we hunted it ourselves. Xieting Zhou turned a deaf ear. When he turned his head, he saw Shen Yu's eyebrows furrowed. What's wrong? Shen Yu held the reins and covered her stomach with one hand. My stomach feels a little uncomfortable. Yes. Xieting Zhou stopped talking. There were so many people here that he couldn't continue talking. Shen Yu understood immediately that he was referring to the days of the month at her daughter's house. So he explained, No, the milk in the morning is a bit cold, but it's okay. Let's keep walking. Li Jifeng rubbed his stomach, then turned around and said, It seems that I have a bit of a problem, that is, I have a bad stomach. The group of people continued to move forward. Occasionally, hares and foxes were frightened and ran. Li Jifeng squinted one eye. Before he could take aim with the arrow he held, the prey was hit by the arrow and fell to the ground. Then the bodyguard came back with the prey and praised him wildly, Your Highness is good at archery. Li Jifeng calmly collected the unshot arrow, cleared his throat and said, Easy to say, next time I will shoot it directly in the eye. Xieting Zhou couldn't help laughing and glanced at Shen Yu again, only to see her face getting paler and paler. Xieting Zhou reined in his horse and said, If you feel unwell, go back. No more hunting. Shen Yu awkwardly leaned closer and whispered to him. Xieting Zhou nodded, Go ahead, don't go too far. Seeing Shen Yu turning the horse's head to go the other way, Li Jifeng asked, Why is he going? Xieting Zhou spit out 2 words, Go to the toilet. That's just right, Li Jifeng said, I also want to go to the toilet, so I'll go and be his companion. As soon as Li Jifeng moved, he suddenly felt his neck tightening and was wrapped around Xie Tingzhu's riding crop. Ahem, what are you doing? Li Jifeng pulled off his riding crop and asked. Want a companion when you go to the bathroom? How about I accompany you? Li Jifeng hurriedly declined with a smile, you and I don't have to be so polite. It's better for me to go alone. I'm afraid you'll chop my butt with a knife. Li Jifeng went to the other side. Xie Tingzhou ordered, 4 of us will follow him. Li Jifeng turned around and said, I need to go to the toilet. Just right, Xie Tingzhou said, I'll protect you from the wind on all sides. There are wild beasts everywhere in the forest, and the main reason is that I am worried about encountering danger. Li Jifeng came in with Xie Tingzhou, and he had to come out of the forest safely with him, otherwise the charge of murdering the prince and intending to commit rebellion would be slapped on Xie Tingzhu's head, and there was nothing Balin could do. Li Jifeng didn't have much fun with it. Ever since he was 3 years old, he didn't need a maid to accompany him when he went to the toilet. Now there are personal guards on all sides. Even though their backs are turned, it's like shitting in public. Li Jifeng picked up his pants and went back, took a look and said, why hasn't Shijer come back yet? Did he faint because of diarrhea? Xie Tingzhou glanced at him, and Li Jifeng immediately said, go and see for yourself. Wait a minute, Xie Tingzhou said, I'll go. Xie Tingzhou shouted his name and searched for nearly 100 meters, but other than the birds being frightened away, he didn't hear any response. However, Li Jifeng was attracted by the sound echoing in the mountains and forests. Xie Tingzhou was squatting down to check, and there were traces of trampling on the moss. He got on his horse and said solemnly, there are no traces of a fight. Li Jifeng responded, there are no traces of shit. All the personal guards. My Highness's poem is quite right. Xie Tingzhou whistled, and Hai Dongqing chirped in the air, but the forest was too dense for it to come down. Suddenly, there was a sound of horse hooves coming from the other side of the forest, but it came from near to far. Xie Tingzhu's expression changed, he whipped up his horsewhip and rushed out. The forest is lush and there are branches sticking out everywhere. If you are not careful, you can scratch and bleed on your cheeks. Li Jifeng followed hard on his horse, panting out of breath while running, saying, don't chase, I told you there is no shit, you are so smart and you don't understand. Xie Tingzhou reined in his horse suddenly, raising its hoofs high into the air, leaving 2 deep hoof prints when it landed. Li Jifeng finally caught up, now you understand. He said he had a stomachache, but he didn't come to use the toilet at all. I'm telling the truth. If you don't believe me, go back and read. The nonchalant words at the end just cover up his intelligence, and he is still the loser who only knows how to eat, drink and poop. Xie Tingzhou frowned, she deliberately led me to the north. Li Jifeng said, then are you going? My cannibal brothers are all in the south. The north is safer. You, the guard, are really worried about you. Xie Tingzhou was silent for a long time. South or north? Going south means taking risks and joining the battle, while going north means staying safe. She used herself to make him make a choice. Xie Tingzhu's jaw tightened. He could still go south. From today on, he is Li Jifeng's knife, tied to a rope with Li Jifeng. Those who walk on the edge of a knife seek freedom, and those who fail will be shattered into pieces. But once Li Jifeng succeeds to the throne, he can take her back to Balin. Although there are no jackals in human skins in the north, there are real tigers and leopards in the dense forests. Snapped. The whip struck the horse's rump. After all, he was worried that she would be alone, so Xie Tingzhou chased him north. The heavy sound of horse hooves gradually faded away, and the birds hovering in the sky fell back to the forest tops again. A nimble figure slid down from the tree and landed lightly on the ground. Shen Yu turned around and glanced north, unable to hide the reluctance in her eyes. He was originally the carefree prince of Balin and the future king of Balin, but he was summoned to Beijing because of the Yan Liangwen case. She asked him before going to bed last night, what was he planning? He said he just wanted to take her back to Balin. She had nothing to repay for such affection, and she didn't want to put him in a more dangerous situation. After a while, Shen Yu's eyes gradually became firm, and then she walked quickly in the opposite direction without looking back. She didn't want to hide under his wings, she wanted to be on par with him. Isn't planning for China within the country like Yan Mi based in Taikang? From Zhuangzi Autumn Waters. Translation: if you calculate that China is within the 4 seas, the ancients believed that China is surrounded by seas, isn't it just like a tiny grain of rice in a big warehouse? Treating the concubine, eliminating the wife, reborn, I refuse to marry the scumbag and marry the prince. Author, Gigi. Chapter 150. It was almost dark, and a bonfire was lit in the center of the Bashan pasture, and everyone gathered around the fire to drink and eat meat. The princes came out of the forest one after another, but the princes Li Jinjinj, Li Yanchang, and Li Jifeng were still missing. While chatting and laughing, someone said, "It seems that the hunting ground is rich in prey this year, and your highnesses are having so much fun." But I saw that some people were getting more and more anxious, including Emperor Tongxue and Marquis Xianping and his son. After another half an hour, Li Jifeng and Xie Tingzhou came out from the northern forest farm. When Li Jifeng landed, his legs were unsteady. 2 guards each held one of his arms and listened to his screams. Emperor Tongxue looked at Li Jifeng, who had returned, and asked solemnly, "What happened? Is Jifeng injured?" Li Jifeng is still acting coquettishly at such an old age. "Father, my son is injured." "Hey, slow down, slow down." Li Jifeng was helped to sit down. Emperor Tongxue was stunned. "How did you get injured? Where is it?" "The root of my thigh is broken. It wears me out from riding a horse for too long. I'm exhausted." As soon as Li Jifeng said this, everyone laughed immediately, and some people echoed with their compliments, saying that His Highness Ninth Prince was diligent and brave. Emperor Tongxue was speechless. "Father, I have hunted a deer, and I will roast the deer meat for you." Li Jifeng waved to someone to bring the deer up. Xie Tingzhou turned his back to the commotion and strode towards the camp. The guard guarding the tent door raised the curtain, but Xie Tingzhou did not go in. "Shiger hasn't come back yet." The guard said, "No." Xie Tingzhou's face darkened. Bashan Forest Farm is very big, and it takes half a day to go in and out of the forest. If I didn't catch up with her, I thought she would come back by herself, but I didn't expect that she hasn't returned yet. Zifeng, gather some people and go back into the mountain with me." Xie Tingzhou got on his horse. Suddenly, there was a noise from the other side of the pasture. "Prince, His Royal Highness is injured. Hurry. The Imperial Doctor." Xie Tingzhou frowned. There was indeed a problem in the south. The prince was injured in the hunting ground. "I am afraid that no one who entered the southern hunting ground today will be able to escape. It depends on how they can clear away the suspicion. But what he is most worried about now is Shen Yu. She is in the deep mountains and is even more dangerous at night." Just as he was about to leave, he heard Li Jifeng shout, "It's Shiger, and Shiger is back too." Xie Tingzhou immediately hit the horse and arrived in a blink of an eye. He turned over and saw Li Jinjinj being surrounded by a group of people and entering the tent, while she followed alone, covered in blood and looking embarrassed. Xie Tingzhou didn't move, watching from a distance, feeling like he was about to stop breathing. As if she suddenly remembered something, she raised her eyes to search among the crowd, and finally fixed her gaze on him, without moving away for a long time. Xie Tingzhou finally stepped forward, but did not speak. "I'm fine," Shen Yu said in a tired voice, "it's all other people's blood." The worry in Xie Tingzhou's eyes was swept away, and his cold eyes were calm. "You went to the south hunting ground." Shen Yu said nothing. Xie Tingzhou said again, "You led me to the north hunting ground, but you went to the south hunting ground. Why? Shen Yu hasn't decided how to answer yet. A chamberlain chanted from afar, Xian Shizhi is here to see you. Shen Yu glanced at Xie Tingzhou, and she walked towards him. When she passed him, she quickly squeezed his hand. He whispered, you believe me? Shen Yu followed the chamberlain into the imperial tent. There were so many people in the tent that Shen Yu did not dare to take a closer look. She bowed her head and knelt on the ground. There was silence in the tent, as if everyone was holding their breath and concentrating. Shen Yu knelt for a long time before she heard Emperor Tongxiu's voice, your name is Xiu. This is the name that Emperor Tongxiu learned from Li Jinqing. Emperor Tongxiu's voice was full of fatigue, but no one dared to look down upon him. Perhaps this was the majesty of someone who had been in power for a long time. Shen Yu, your majesty, yes. Who are you? Emperor Tongxiu asked. I know, Li Jifeng interjected, he is the guard who stopped the boat. Emperor Tongxiu said, since he is the bodyguard of the Prince Balin, he should be with Xie Yun. Why are you with the prince? Li Jifeng, I know. Shut up, Emperor Tongxiu interrupted, looked at Shen Yu and said, tell me the whole story in detail. Yes, Shen Yu said, I suddenly felt unwell on the way, so I looked for a place to go to the toilet. After that, I got separated from His Highness the Ninth Prince and His Highness the Crown Prince. I remember before entering the mountain, His Highness the Ninth Prince told His Highness the Seventh Prince that we were going to the hunting ground in the south. So I chased south, but I couldn't find the two His Highnesses. Instead, I met His Highness the Crown Prince, who was besieged by assassins. At that time, more than half of the bodyguards of His Highness the Crown Prince were dead and wounded, and they were no match for the assassins, so I joined the battle, but there were too many of them, and the bodyguards of His Highness the Crown Prince also gradually decreased during the fight. I had no choice but to leave the others behind and lead the battle alone. Let His Royal Highness avoid the assassins. Emperor Tongxiu was silent for a moment, and suddenly asked Li Jifeng, I remember you came from the north, right? You were originally planning to go south, but why did you change your mind temporarily? Shen Yu was nervous and raised her head slightly. She saw Li Jifeng brushing off his previous slutty look and said with a serious expression. He said, the woods in the southern hunting ground are too dense. The sea turtle that stopped the boat couldn't get out. How could it find prey for us? It had to go north. Fortunately, it didn't go south. Li Jifeng looked worried, but it seemed that he could not completely dispel Emperor Tongxiu's doubts. Let Xie Yun come in, Emperor Tongxiu said. Xie Tingzhou entered the imperial tent and was given a seat by Emperor Tongxiu, but did not ask Shen Yu to get up. Shen Yu raised her eyes and met Xie Tingzhou, who was sitting next to Li Jifeng. She glanced at him quickly and said, Your Highness. Xie Tingzhou said lightly yeah and stopped looking at her. Only then did Shen Yu see that there were many people sitting in the tent, including Pei Chunli, Marquis Xianping, Zhang Lianzi, and other princes. Except for Zhang Yu and Qing, all the important ministers in the cabinet were there. Emperor Tongxiu said, the prince was assassinated in the hunting ground. I have ordered the mountains to be closed and the boats to be stopped. Xie Tingzhou said, I'm here. Why did you suddenly change your route and go to the north? Emperor Tongxiu asked the same question again. Emperor Tongxiu himself took this position amidst the fighting among the princes. The title of Ninth Five Supreme Being is too tempting. The royal family can believe in interests, but the most unbelievable thing is brotherhood. Xie Tingzhou's tone was calm, there are wild beasts in the hunting ground in the south. I have a sick young man, and if I take the ninth prince with me, there is no guarantee that I will escape unscathed. It would be safer to go to the north. Emperor Tongxiu nodded slowly, as if this reason was more convincing to him. Xie Tingzhou asked, how is His Royal Highness doing now? Emperor Tongxiu raised his hand and pointed, the imperial doctor is treating you inside. The emperor's palace occupied a large area, and the imperial tent was divided into several compartments. The prince was in the room where the emperor slept. Sietingzhou glanced around the tent, tapped his fingertips on his knees and said, "Why don't you see the seventh prince?" As soon as these words came out, everyone reacted. They were so confused because the prince was injured that they actually forgot that there was another prince who had not returned. Emperor Tongxue frowned, "Come here, send people into the mountain to look for him. We will definitely bring Lao Qi back." Everyone in the royal tent had different expressions and thoughts. Shen Yu didn't dare to look at Sietingzhou, but found a pair of eyes staring at her. She looked back, and it was the fourth prince Li Zhaonian who was looking at her. Warm reminder, if you find that clicking the next page will force you to jump to other websites, please use the chapter error or contact us at the bottom to inform us. We will handle it as soon as possible. Thank you for your understanding. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Treating the Concubine, Eliminating the Wife, Reborn, I Refuse to Marry the Scumbag and Marry the Prince. Author, Gigi. Chapter 152. Emperor Tongxue glanced at him and knew that Sietingzhou had led people to surround Zhang Mansion. The two must have formed a rift, and it was reasonable to suppress Zhang Lian's desire. "In my opinion, my dear, what's wrong?" Zhang Lianzi said sternly, "How can I convince others if I am ranked as a 6th rank lieutenant general without passing the martial arts examination?" Shen Yu said, "I have followed General Shen for many years and killed hundreds of enemies at the border. I wonder if this is enough to convince others." Zhang Lian choked and couldn't find a reason to refute. What military commanders value is military merit, and many good generals are promoted from the military. Li Yanchang narrowed his eyes and said, "It turned out to be a man under General Shen, so how could he become the prince's bodyguard?" "Seventh brother could be forgetful," Prince Li Jinqing said. "It was the prince who traveled thousands of miles to rescue Yan Liang Pass." Sietingzhou didn't show any signs of dew on his face, but his hands tightened on the armrests of the chair, which made a faint creaking sound. Li Jifeng was close and patted him when he heard the sound. "What's wrong with you?" Everyone heard the sound and looked over. Sietingzhou immediately relieved himself, looked at Shen Yu leisurely, and said with a smile, "People go to higher places. It's you who have given in to the prince's palace in the north." Shen Yu pursed her lips and said nothing. "It sounds like the prince is quite dissatisfied with his father's arrangements." Li Yanchang looked at Sietingzhou and meant something. Before Sietingzhou could speak, Li Jifeng had already retorted, "Brother Qi is so irritable today, how can he catch and bite whom?" Li Jinqing said, "Father has decreed that this matter cannot be discussed. If the seventh brother is dissatisfied because he saved me, just come to me. There is no need to find fault here." With such a big hat on Li Yanchang's head, how dare he continue to dwell on this matter? Li Yanchang held his breath and said, "My younger brother is just discussing things. My elder brother doesn't need to be so anxious to label me when he excludes dissidents." Li Jinqing sneered, "Then you should focus more on catching the assassin." The brothers were quarreling with each other, which gave Emperor Tongxue a headache. Emperor Tongxue said and raised his slightly closed eyes, "Since you are a talent trained by Zhongan, it's settled. Shi Yu will return to Beijing early tomorrow morning to take charge of the mission. I ordered you to set off within 3 days. Everyone is gone, come on." With the final word, the rest of the people dispersed one after another. Pei Chunli ran the fastest, and he felt that if he ran slower, he would be killed. There were twists and turns in the tent. Pei Chunli stretched his neck and looked back. Fortunately, Sietingzhou didn't follow. He patted his chest happily, turned around and was about to leave, but suddenly took a step back. There was a knife on his neck, and the handle was in Sietingzhou's hand. "No, no, no, please don't be like this, Your Majesty." Pei Chunli tried to fool him, We are all friends, right? This is a fake knife, right? Xie Zhou looked at him. You try. Pei Chunli swallowed, pulled a small piece of hair and touched the knife tentatively, and immediately heard a wow sound. It's really a good knife for blowing hair and cutting off hair. However, Your Majesty, you and I have no grievances in the past. Recently, we don't have to be so anxious to avenge our recent vengeance. It's late at night. Pei Chunli faced Xie Ting's heavy gaze and tilted his head back and forth, still unable to avoid the knife hanging on his neck. Look, why don't we put the knife away and talk about it? The thin smile hanging in the imperial tent just now disappeared, and Xie Ting's eyes were grim. When you helped her, you should have expected the result now. Pei Chunli lowered his eyes and stared at the knife on his neck, and said with difficulty, I just said a few words, and they helped me. Why didn't you go to them? Xie Zhou moved the knife forward. Pei Chunli immediately shouted, Ayu! Ayu, help me! Xie Zhou narrowed his eyes slightly. Shen Yu stepped forward, pulled Pei Chunli behind him, and blocked the knife in front of her. She knew that Xie Zhou would be angry tonight, and she didn't want to add fuel to the fire at this time, but she saw that Xie Zhou really had murderous intent in his eyes, and she was afraid that he would accidentally hurt Pei Chunli if he couldn't control himself. You go first, Shen Yu said to Pei Chunli. Pei Chunli ran away like a rabbit as if he had been granted amnesty. Shen Yu stared at Xie Zhou. I asked him to do this. If you are angry at me, everything I did today has a reason. I can explain it to you one by one. Xie Zhou lowered his knife and inserted it into the ground. The blood on her body had dried long ago, and some of it was solidified on her cheeks. He reached out and touched it, only to touch a dried blood clot. Go and wash up. Xie Zhou turned around and said, there is hot water in the tent. The tent is divided by screens, with the inner room used for sleeping and the outer room used for living. Xie Zhou sat at the table with a cup of strong tea in his hand. There was a rustling sound coming from inside. He put down his lamp, turned his head and asked, are there any injuries on your body? Shen Yu got into the tub and looked at his silhouette reflected on the screen by the lights. Although she couldn't see anything clearly, she seemed to be able to see his anger and unhappiness from the shadow. No, she said obediently, I didn't get myself hurt. Xie Zhou didn't appreciate it. Check carefully. If you don't check well, I will check it myself. Shen Yu said, really not. It was quiet outside for a moment. Throw out all your clothes, Xie Zhou said, all of them. Shen Yu thought for a while, then reached out to pick up the clothes on the ground and threw them to the screen. She also held two items in her hand, crumpled them into a ball and said, the innermost one, I don't need it, right? After a moment, Xie Zhou said stiffly, no need. Even though the blood stains have dried, there is still a strong iron smell left. Xie Zhou spread out the bloody clothes one by one and inspected them carefully. There were 2 holes in the riding clothes and traces of scratches, but there were no cuts on the inner clothes, indicating that she was indeed not injured. Shen Yu sank into the water, and the water covered her mouth and nose, leaving only a pair of eyes looking at the figure on the screen. Xie Zhou sat there for a while, and when he couldn't pour out a drop of tea from the pot, he got up and went out. Shen Yu felt that Xie Zhou was a little too talkative tonight. He did not ask about the ins and outs of the matter, nor did he scold her, giving her a feeling of the calm before the storm. This made her feel a little panicked. Treating the concubine, eliminating the wife, reborn, I refuse to marry the scumbag and marry the prince. Author, Gigi. Chapter 153. The moon and stars are sparse, and everything is silent. I was careless, Li Jinqing said. I thought I could get rid of Li Zhaonian in the spring search, but I didn't expect that he sprained his foot and escaped. Marquis Xianping on the side said nothing. Li Jinqing originally planned with Marquis Xianping to get rid of the 4th Prince Li Zhaonian during the spring search. This was Li Jingjing's biggest opponent. Many ministers in the court did not like the way he acted, and preferred Li Zhaonian, who was open-minded and benevolent. Emperor Tongxu's preference for Li Zhaonian also made him wary. Unexpectedly, after planning for a long time, it all came to nothing. "Uncle, do you think he is lucky? Or did he have a premonition?" Li Jingjing personally poured tea for Marquis Xianping. Marquis Xianping took the tea and said, "Prince, now is not the time to think about this. If it hadn't rained at that time today, I'm afraid we would have been in trouble." Li Jingjing nodded, "The mantis stalks the cicada and the oriole follows behind. I was careless. I didn't expect that there would be a group of people. Who arranged this group of people?" He murmured his analysis, "The fourth child is the smartest. He sprained his ankle and refused to go into the mountains, which may not be to keep himself out of the situation. There is also the old nine. The old nine has been stupid for more than 20 years, and he will not change overnight. You're smart, do you know the plan?" Marquis Xianping shook his head, "That's not necessarily the case. Don't forget, Your Highness the Prince, that there was Xieting Zhou beside him. Back then, Xieting Zhou stood up with his sword and drove the Baibei people hundreds of miles away in one fell swoop. What a disaster! The young man is Wushuan. Although his martial arts is useless, his brain is not broken. Even if such a person is disabled, he cannot be underestimated. Otherwise, why would your majesty detain him in the capital at this moment?" "Father knows that he is dying," Li Jingjing said seriously. "He is worried that one day he will leave and I will not be able to suppress Balin, so by detaining Xieting Zhou here, he is paving the way for me. Such a person may not be able to teach a fool, so we'd better be more vigilant." After Xianping Ho finished speaking, he took a sip of tea. Li Jingjing snorted coldly, "What happened today is not impossible for Lao Qi." Marquis Xuanping's eyes flashed, "How can I say this? Didn't he also meet an assassin? Who knows if he was injured intentionally to clear away suspicion? If that's the case, a person who can be ruthless to himself will be willing to spare anything." Li Jingjing added, "None of my brothers are simple. When the imperial power changes, all kinds of monsters and ghosts will surface." After the night talk, Marquis Xianping came out of the tent, put on his cloak and walked towards his tent. Li Yanchang was sitting alone in the tent when someone opened the curtain and came in. Li Yanchang raised his eyelids and asked, "Why are you here?" "I can't leave." The man, dressed in black, sat down and said, "Let's make this short. What's going on with you today?" "It was just a little bit close. It was just a little bit close to success." Unexpectedly, a sudden rain suddenly appeared, allowing Li Jingjing to escape. A trace of gloom flashed across Li Yanchang's face. The man in black said, "You reacted quickly and stabbed yourself twice, but you were too cruel." "It's not a big deal," Li Yanchang said nonchalantly. "Of course you have to be more sincere in your appearance, otherwise no one will believe it." He changed the topic. "Pei Chunli seems to have a good relationship with Shi Yu, but it seems that he may not know that she is a woman." "Woman?" the man in black asked in surprise. "That's right. Since you knew she was a woman, why didn't you expose her on the spot?" Li Yanchang said calmly, "It's a long-term goal to catch the big fish. What effect will exposing her now? It can only show that she is respectable and admirable as a woman on the battlefield. If I hold on to her, Li Jingjing can just use this to say my hostility to her stems from the fact that she saved the prince. But it will be different when she returns from suppressing the bandits. If she is promoted as an official in the court, wouldn't it be better to treat her as a deceiver with ulterior motives?" Sin Laxi stopped the boat and launched it into the water. Besides, Li Yanchang used the cup lid to skim off the foam. "Qi Chang's matter has been delayed for too long. It is inevitable that there will be long nights and many dreams. It is just right for her to destroy the evidence for us." The man in black's cloak covered his eyes, only his nose and chin were exposed. He thought for a moment and said, I'm not going alone, but I still don't worry, if she notices something. You are too cautious, Li Yanchang smiled arrogantly, Ge Liangji has died with the secret. Now my father is eager to end this matter. Besides, who would think of bringing food and grass? It's better to be cautious, the man in black said seriously. I will send people to Kicking. If there is a problem, don't let Shija return to Beijing alive. The maid came in and changed the water twice before Shen Yu could wash away the bloody smell from her body. Shen Yu waited in the tent for a long time, typing up her manuscript, but Xieting Zhou didn't come back. After walking out of the tent, the guard standing guard at the door immediately saluted, Sir. Shen Yu was stunned for a moment before she realized that she was now an official of the imperial court. The guard asked, Are you looking for His Royal Highness? Shen Yu nodded, Yes, where are the others? The two guards looked at each other and said, Your Majesty is feeling unwell and has informed His Majesty that he will return to the capital overnight. Shen Yu was stunned on the spot. He was fine before, there was nothing wrong with him, it was just an excuse to return to Beijing. Is the sentence in the account that she succumbed in Bailin Palace serious? He was neither harsh to her nor scolded her. He didn't even want to hear another explanation from her. He left in a hurry overnight. Did he mean to draw a clear line with her? With a lump in her throat, Shen Yu opened the curtain and entered the tent. The two guards were about to chat secretly, but saw the door curtain opened again, and a riding crop appeared in her hand. Shen Yu gritted her teeth. She would not let things go by in a daze. Even if she had to draw a clear line, she would ask her in person. Li Yanchang sent the man in black away and stood in front of the tent blowing the wind to wake him up. Huh, he looked at it intently and shouted, Shijir. Shen Yu held the horse. She was planning to return to Beijing overnight to find Xieting Zhou. She looked sideways and said, Your Highness 7th. Li Yanchang's injuries were all on his upper body, and his legs and feet were still nimble. He took a few steps forward and said, Perhaps I should call you Mr. Shi from now on. Shen Yu said calmly, I'm just doing something for His Majesty. If His Majesty's 7th Prince is fine and Shijir has other important matters, then. Li Yanchang protracted his tone and interrupted her, It's just a matter of a few words, why are you so anxious? Shen Yu pursed her lips and said, Your Majesty, 7th Prince, please tell me if you have anything to say. A smile appeared on Li Yanchang's feminine face, Why don't you come closer, I think some things should be discussed in secret. Shen Yu frowned, but she had no fear. Li Yanchang's kung fu was no match for her. She led the horse closer and said, Go ahead. Quick words. Li Yanchang stroked his hands, I just want to express my admiration to Master Shi. After all, not everyone can do it as a daughter on the battlefield. Shen Yu's eyes suddenly shrank, and her thumb had already moved half an inch out of the knife on her waist. Li Yanchang clearly saw the warning in her eyes, glanced at her hand holding the knife, smiled and said, You misunderstood. If I wanted to expose you, I would have exposed you long ago in the palace. Why confront you now and tell you, you may not believe it, but I have no ill intentions. Shen Yu said, What do you want? There is no request. Li Yanchang said, There are people in the court who are easy to do things. If one day Prince Bailin becomes unreliable, you can follow me. Shen Yu got on her horse, looked down at him, curled her lips, and then said nothing. The sound of horse hooves clattered, and the sassy figure shuttled between the tents and disappeared in the blink of an eye. This man is so unruly. Li Yanchang didn't even turn around and said, Zhang, you can see the arrogance all over her body. This temper is really to my liking. Just now I took a closer look, and I saw that the facial features are really beautiful, especially those eyes, but it's a pity that they are painted. It's too dark, I don't know what it would look like in women's clothing. The guard thought for a moment and said, The sword dance under the moon that night was indeed beautiful. Li Yanchang tilted his head and said, "Let you go do the work, you still have time to look at beauties." The guard hurriedly knelt down and said, "I only had a glimpse at that time and my memory is still fresh."